right, good morning, everyone. So I have the fortunate position of standing in between you and our first coffee break. So today what I want to talk to you about are the most important conversations you have each day, the conversations you have with yourself. As you just heard, my name is Ethan Kross. I'm the director of the University of Michigan Emotion and Self-Control Lab. And for the past 25 years, I've been studying how people can manage their emotions to live better lives. What I've learned during that time is that a key to managing our emotions effectively involves harnessing how to manage this mysterious force called the voice inside our head. Now, I realize by the looks on your faces that some of you may be wondering right now, why is a purported serious scientist talking about a squishy topic like a voice inside our head? But if some of you have just asked yourself that question, I want to point out you've just activated the voice inside your head. And that is totally okay, because it is normal. We all have a voice inside our head. Here's a scientific fact that I absolutely love. We spend between 1/2 and 1/3 of our waking hours not focused on the present. Between 1/2 and 1/3 of the time, our minds are drifting away. We are thinking about other things. Guess what we are doing during a significant portion of that time that we're drifting away? We are talking to ourselves, and we are listening to what we say. Now, when scientists like myself use the term inner voice, what we're talking about is our ability to silently use language to reflect on our lives. And it turns out this is a superpower of the human mind. It lets us do many, many extraordinary things. I'll just list off a few of them. One thing your inner voice lets you do is keep verbal information active for short periods of time. So if you ever go to the grocery store, your partner tells you to get something. About 7 seconds down the first aisle, you think to yourself, crap, what was I supposed to get? And then you rehearse the list in your head. Cheese, milk, eggs. It's my grocery list. You don't do that out loud typically. You do that silently. That's you using the voice inside your head. We also use the voice inside our head to simulate and plan, like when we go over what we're going to say before a presentation or an interview. And of course, we use the voice inside our head to control and motivate ourselves. I was talking up a storm about 2 minutes ago when I was standing right over there. I said to myself, come on, man, you've got this. 45 minutes and you are done. And you all are very nervous right now, because you think I'm going to talk for 45 minutes. Perhaps most magically, we use our inner voice to make sense of who we are. Life throws curveballs at us all the time. And when we receive those pitches, we stop, we pause, we typically turn our attention inward, and we try to make sense of what is happening. Why am I feeling this way? What does this mean about who I am? We ask ourselves those questions and we answer them using the voice inside our head. And the stories we create, those stories give shape and texture to our sense of self. They craft our identity. So your inner voice is this remarkable tool. There is, however, a catch that has kept me in business for about 25 years. And the catch is, because this tool is so incredibly useful, we reach for it when we're struggling, but it doesn't always work very well. It jams up on us. We go inside looking for solutions, but we don't find clear answers to our questions, and we start spinning instead. We ruminate, we worry, we perseverate. I realize this phenomenon may not affect this crowd as much as most. That was a joke. Thank you. And when that happens, we experience what I call chatter. How do you know you're experiencing chatter? If you find yourself trying to focus on a problem to work through it but not making any progress, or if you find yourself berating yourself incessantly, I'm an idiot, such an idiot, a really big idiot. Those are 2 telltale signs. Now, I've been studying this phenomenon of chatter for a long time, and I genuinely think it is one of the big problems we face as a species. I say this not to scare or exaggerate. I say it based on what I know of the data surrounding the implications of chatter. Because if you look at what it does to us, you see that it sinks us in 3 areas of life that I would argue all of us here care a great deal about. First thing that chatter does, makes it really hard for us to think and perform. if you have ever had the experience of sitting down to read a few pages in a book, under oath you would swear to a judge that you have read the material on the page. It's past your eye gaze. But you get to the end and you don't remember a damn thing you've read. You've experienced chatter. What chatter does is it consumes our limited attentional resources. It soaks them up like a sponge, leaving very little left over to do the things we often want and need to do, like read the book or pay attention to someone else. We also know that chatter can create friction in our relationships with others. Cross-culturally, people are motivated to share the glory of their mental chatter with other people. That is, we typically want to talk about it. So you find someone who is willing to listen, you start talking, but then you keep talking over and over and over again. And this is a really sad finding. What you find happening is that you end up pushing away people who genuinely care about you because there's only so much they can listen to before we start to bring them down. Then there's our health. Chatter helps explain how stress gets under the skin, because what it does is it prolongs our stress responses. When we're replaying those stressful experiences over and over in our minds, that's keeping that stress response active. And that exerts a wear and tear on our body that is physically damaging. Predicts things like problems of cardiovascular disease, inflammation, even certain forms of cancer. When people hear about these findings, the question they typically ask me is, how can I silence the voice inside my head? As we've just seen, you don't want to do that because the voice inside your head is one of your superpowers. A better question to ask is, how can you harness this voice? And the good news here is that that is precisely the question that scientists have been focusing on for a few decades now, and we have learned a lot about how to do this. Now, if the reason why chatter gets us in trouble is because it zooms us in on our problems, right? We focus on the awfulness about what we're going through. The antidote is to take a step back and zoom out. Look at that bigger picture where solutions to our problems often reside. I want to talk to you about 3 ways that we can do this today, according to science. Let's start with language. Shortly before Malala Yousafzai became the youngest person to ever win the Nobel Peace Prize, she went on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart to give an interview in which she described her experience grappling with the threat of the Taliban plotting to kill her. So if you were paying attention, you might have heard her do something a little odd. She starts off referring to herself in the first person. I used to think, what would I do if the Taliban would come and kill me? It's the way we typically think about ourselves. But once she gets to imagining the most chatter-provoking experience any of us could contemplate, a well-organized terrorist group coming to kill us, she switches. She starts addressing herself using her own name and you. I would say to myself, Malala, you just take a shoe and hit him. She's talking to herself as though she's talking to someone else. We call this distant self-talk, and it's a useful tool to manage chatter because we know from lots of research that we are much, much better at giving advice to others than we are giving that advice to ourselves. That's right, we are all giant hypocrites. And science validates this, so you should not feel bad about that. There's a name for this phenomenon. It's called Solomon's Paradox, named after the Bible's King Solomon, who was world-renowned, historically renowned for being one of the wisest figures in history. His wisdom applied to other people. If you dig into his life, you'll find that he actually made a slew of terrible decisions when it came to his own affairs. When we use the word you in our own name to coach ourselves through a problem, it switches our perspective. We start thinking about ourselves from a safe distance, like we were talking to someone else, and that makes it a lot easier for us to work through our problems effectively. A second thing you could do to manage chatter is to find someone to talk to, but not anyone will do. A lot of people think that the key to helping other people with their chatter is to let them vent. Just get it out, express your emotions. Venting can be really good for strengthening the friendship and relational bonds between 2 people. It is good to know that there is someone out there who's willing to take the time and listen to me, to empathize and validate my experience. The problem with venting is that if that's all you do in a conversation about your chatter, you leave that conversation feeling really good about your relationship with the person you just spoke to. They've got my back, but you haven't done anything to deal with the problem, so it lingers. And you've just spent all this time bathing in it, So you leave that conversation just as upset, if not more upset as when you started. So you want to be really careful who you select to talk about your chatter. Who are your chatter advisors? They should be people who both let you express your emotions, but work with you to broaden your perspective. They're in an ideal position to help you do that because the problem isn't happening to them. Both are essential features of a productive conversation. Last tip I want to give you is perhaps my favorite. About 10 years ago, scientists at the University of California, Berkeley, tracked a group of military veterans and first responders as they paddled down Utah's majestic Green River. They measured participants' chatter and well-being levels both before the multi-day rafting trip and after. By the end of the trip, not surprisingly, they discovered that people's chatter levels went down. They were feeling better. That wasn't surprising. What was surprising was what predicted that improvement in their chatter. It was participants' experience of awe. Awe is an emotion we experience when we are in the presence of something vast and indescribable. Lots of people get it from the natural world. I would encourage you all to leave these wonderful premises at some point, not during a session, please. And just look at the vistas around you. They are awe-inspiring. We also experience awe from innovation. I'm a science fiction geek. Every time I contemplate interplanetary travel, I experience awe. I cannot wrap my head around the fact that we have figured out how to blast SUV-sized vehicles off this planet and safely land them on other planets. We've got a rover on Mars. Don't know how that worked out. When we experience awe, what happens is we experience a shrinking of the self. We feel smaller when we are contemplating something vast and indescribable. And when we feel smaller, so does our chatter. About 7,000 years ago, the first surgical technique was invented. Its name, trepanation. What it involved doing is carving holes in people's skulls to let evil spirits release. One of the reasons why this technique was used? To help people manage big emotional responses. Fast forward to 1949. There's another spike on the emotion regulation innovation timeline. A Spanish physician is awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine for another emotion regulation technique. This one is called the frontal lobotomy. Consists of poking holes in people's frontal cortices. Relieve emotional suffering. We have fortunately come a long way since carving holes in people's heads and poking holes in their brains to ease emotional pain. What we need to do a better job doing is taking the scientific tools that we have discovered and utilizing them in our own lives and sharing them with others, encouraging them to do the same. We spend a lot of time working, teaching one another how to communicate more effectively between people, between groups. We need to spend an equivalent amount of time teaching people how to communicate more effectively with themselves. Thank you all.